$50 billion. That's the amount the Pentagon was ordered to cut from its budget in January 2025. But this wasn't a reduction, it was a transformation. Within 6 months, military bases that had operated for 80 years began closing. 35,000 American soldiers stationed in Germany received transfer orders. Another 54,000 in Japan were told to prepare for redeployment. Aircraft carriers that cost $13 billion each were scheduled for early retirement. Fighter jet programs worth hundreds of billions were canceled or frozen. Defense contractors who had built their entire business models around traditional warfare watched their stock prices collapse. Lockheed Martin lost 12% of its value in a single week. Raytheon executives requested emergency meetings at the White House. The entire military-industrial complex that had dominated American defense policy since World War II was being dismantled, and replacing it was something nobody outside a small circle fully understood. This matters because the United States military is not just an army, it is the foundation of global order. American aircraft carriers keep shipping lanes open. American soldiers stationed in South Korea prevent war on the peninsula. American bases in Japan deter Chinese aggression. American troops in Germany reassure NATO allies that Russia will never march west. For 80 years, this system has kept the world relatively stable. It has prevented great power conflicts. It has protected global trade. It has maintained American dominance. What happens when that system is redesigned by a man who has called it a bad deal for 4 decades? What happens when the country that built the international order decides to stop maintaining it? What happens when $86 billion in annual military spending gets redirected toward a completely different vision of American power? These are not hypothetical questions. They are happening right now, and the answers will shape the next century of human history. To understand what is happening in 2025 and 2026, we need to go back to a newspaper advertisement from 1987. In September of that year, a New York real estate developer paid $94,801 to place full-page ads in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Boston Globe. The developer was Donald Trump. He was 41 years old. He had never held political office. He had no foreign policy experience, but he had an opinion about American defense strategy, and he was willing to pay to share it with the country. The advertisement was addressed to the American people. Its message was simple and direct. The United States was being taken advantage of by its allies. Japan was getting rich while America paid for its defense. Saudi Arabia was accumulating vast wealth while American soldiers protected its oil fields. European nations were building generous welfare states while American taxpayers funded NATO. Trump called this arrangement unfair and foolish. He said America should demand payment for its protection. He said allies who refuse to pay should be abandoned. He said the money saved should be invested in American infrastructure and American priorities. The foreign policy establishment dismissed the advertisement as the ramblings of a celebrity businessman who didn't understand international relations. They explained that American military presence overseas wasn't charity, it was strategy. By maintaining bases around the world, America could project power and protect its interests without fighting wars on its own soil. By defending allies, America kept them from developing their own nuclear weapons and starting regional arms races. By guaranteeing security, America gained influence over the economic and political decisions of other nations. The system wasn't about generosity, it was about control. Trump didn't care about these explanations. He saw numbers. He saw dollars leaving America and never coming back. He saw a transaction where one party was clearly losing, and he believed that party was the United States. For the next 3 decades, Trump repeated this message whenever anyone would listen. He said it in interviews. He said it in books. He said it on television. He said it on television. He said it on social media. The specifics changed with circumstances, but the core argument never wavered. America was paying too much. Allies were paying too little. The deal needed to be renegotiated. In 2016, Trump ran for president on this platform. He called NATO obsolete. He questioned whether America should defend allies who didn't meet their spending commitments. He suggested that Japan and South Korea should develop their own nuclear weapons rather than relying on American protection. Foreign policy experts were horrified. They said Trump was threatening to destroy the international order that America had spent 70 years building. Trump said that order was destroying America. He won the election. But during his first term, Trump discovered that changing American military policy was harder than changing rhetoric. The Pentagon resisted. Congress resisted. Allies resisted. The bureaucracy that managed American defense policy had its own priorities and its own inertia. Trump made some changes at the margins. He pressured NATO allies to increase their spending. He demanded better terms from South Korea and Japan. He talked about bringing troops home, but the fundamental structure of American military presence remained intact. When Trump left office in January 2021, there were still tens of thousands of American soldiers stationed around the world, still hundreds of bases operating, still hundreds of billions flowing to traditional defense programs. Then something changed. In November 2024, Trump won the presidency again. This time, he came prepared. He had spent 4 years thinking about what went wrong during his first term. He had identified the bureaucratic obstacles that blocked his agenda. He had assembled a team of loyalists who shared his vision, and he had developed a plan to overcome the resistance that had frustrated him before. The plan had a name. Some called it Fortress America. Others called it the Trump Doctrine. Whatever you called it, the core concept was the same. America would stop trying to police the world. It would bring its soldiers home. It would close its foreign bases. It would end its security guarantees to allies who didn't pay their fair share. And it would invest the savings in a new kind of military power. One focused on defending American territory rather than projecting force around the globe. One built on technology rather than manpower. One designed for the conflicts of the future rather than the wars of the past. To implement this vision, Trump needed to overcome the Pentagon. The Department of Defense is the largest employer in the world. It has 3.4 million employees. It operates 750 military bases in 80 countries. It spends $2.4 billion every single day. It has its own culture, its own priorities, its own way of doing things. Presidents come and go every 4 or 8 years. The Pentagon endures. For decades, it had successfully resisted attempts to fundamentally change American defense strategy. Secretaries of Defense who pushed too hard found themselves isolated. Presidents who demanded too much found their orders delayed or reinterpreted or simply ignored. Trump's solution was unprecedented. In February 2025, he signed Executive Order 14178, creating the Department of Government Efficiency. He put Elon Musk in charge. The billionaire who had disrupted the automotive industry and the space industry was now being asked to disrupt the defense industry. Musk brought his own team. They were engineers and accountants and management consultants, not generals or diplomats. They looked at the Pentagon the way they would look at any inefficient organization. They asked simple questions that had complicated answers. Why does America have 35,000 troops in Germany? The answer involves the history of World War II, the Cold War, the reunification of Germany, the expansion of NATO, and the ongoing threat from Russia. But Musk's team wasn't interested in history. They were interested in numbers. Each soldier stationed overseas costs $150,000 per year when you factor in housing, transportation, healthcare, and support services. 35,000 soldiers multiplied by $150,000 equals $5.25 billion annually. Just for Germany, just for personnel costs. Not counting the cost of maintaining bases, equipment, training, and operations. Why does America have 54,000 troops in Japan? The answer involves the history of World War II, the Korean War, the rise of China, and the defense of Taiwan. But again, the numbers were simple. 54,000 soldiers at 150,000 each equals $8.1 billion per year. Why does America have 28,500 troops in South Korea? The answer involves the armistice that ended the Korean War in 1953, the ongoing threat from North Korea, and the complex relationship between Seoul and Washington. The cost is $4.275 billion annually. Across all overseas deployments, the United States maintains approximately 200,000 troops on foreign soil. The personnel cost alone is $30 billion per year. Add in base operations, equipment, logistics, and support, and the total approaches $100 billion annually. That's money flowing out of America and into other countries. Musk's team called it the most expensive charity program in human history. The generals had different answers to these questions. They talked about deterrence. American troops in Germany make Russia think twice before moving west. American troops in Japan make China cautious about Taiwan. American troops in South Korea prevent North Korea from starting a second Korean War. Remove those troops and the calculations change. Adversaries become bolder. Allies become nervous. The stability that American presence provides disappears. The cost of that instability would be far higher than the cost of maintaining the current system. But Trump had already made his decision. He didn't want to hear about deterrence. He wanted to hear about savings. And in March 2025, he announced the framework for the biggest restructuring of the American military since the end of World War II. The plan had several components. First, the United States would reduce its troop presence in Europe by 30% over the next 2 years. Bases in Germany would close. Soldiers would be redeployed to American soil. NATO allies who wanted continued American protection would have to pay dramatically more for it. Second, the United States would reduce its troop presence in Asia by 25%. The exact distribution of cuts would depend on negotiations with Japan and South Korea. Countries that agreed to pay more would keep more American soldiers. Countries that refused would see larger reductions. Third, the money saved from overseas deployments would be redirected into 3 areas: Space Force, Cyber Command, and Border Security. The numbers were staggering. Space Force would receive $35 billion in 2026, a 40% increase from 2024. The money would fund new satellite systems, space-based sensors, and weapons capable of operating in orbit. Cyber Command would receive $22 billion, a 55% increase. The money would fund offensive and defensive cyber capabilities, artificial intelligence systems, and quantum computing research. Border Security would receive $18 billion, a 200% increase. The money would fund drone surveillance, sensor networks, wall construction, and autonomous patrol systems. The logic was clear if you understood Trump's worldview. Traditional military power projects forced around the world. Soldiers stationed overseas can respond to crises anywhere. Aircraft carriers can move to hotspots within days. This kind of military is expensive and requires constant deployment. It protects global trade routes and allied nations and international institutions. It maintains the American-led world order. Trump's new military would be different. It would focus on the American homeland. It would use technology rather than manpower. It would defend borders rather than distant oceans. It would protect American territory rather than Allied territory. It would be cheaper to operate because machines don't need housing or healthcare or pensions. And it would be under direct American control rather than deployed at the request of foreign governments. The defense industry reacted with panic. For 70 years, companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman had built their businesses around a specific vision of American military power. They built aircraft carriers that cost $13 billion each. They built fighter jets that cost $100 million each. They built tanks and artillery and warships designed for conventional warfare against nation-state adversaries. Trump's new vision threatened all of this. If the military pivots to drones and satellites and cyber weapons, what happens to the companies that build manned fighters and surface ships? If troops come home from overseas, what happens to the contractors who support those deployments? Defense stocks plummeted in the weeks after Trump's announcement. Lobbyists swarmed Capitol Hill. Former generals went on television to warn about the dangers of abandoning allies. Think tanks published reports documenting the risks of reducing American military presence. The entire national security establishment mobilized to stop what it saw as a catastrophic mistake. But something had changed since Trump's first term. This time he had allies in the bureaucracy. He had appointed loyalists to key positions throughout the Defense Department. He had built relationships with a new generation of military officers who were frustrated with the old way of doing things. And he had public support. Years of endless wars, rising deficits, and declining infrastructure had made many Americans receptive to the idea that military spending was out of control. Trump's message that allies should pay their fair share resonated with voters who saw their own communities struggling while money flowed to defend wealthy countries overseas. The international reaction was even more dramatic. In April 2025, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol flew to Washington for emergency consultations. The United States had announced plans to reduce its troop presence on the Korean peninsula from 28,500 to approximately 14,000. This was the most significant change in American force posture since the Korean War armistice. Yoon came prepared to negotiate. South Korea was already paying $1.1 billion per year toward the cost of American troops. Yoon offered to double that amount to $2.2 billion. Trump reportedly demanded $10 billion. The gap was too wide. The meeting ended without agreement. Japan faced similar pressure. The United States has 54,000 troops in Japan, the largest overseas deployment anywhere in the world. Under existing agreements, Japan pays approximately $2 billion annually toward hosting costs. Trump wanted Japan to pay the full cost, which he estimated at $12 billion per year. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba flew to Washington in May 2025 to discuss the issue. Japan's constitution has limited military spending to approximately 1% of GDP since World War II. Meeting Trump's demands would require Japan to fundamentally change its approach to defense. After decades of relying on American protection, Japan would need to build its own military capabilities. This is exactly what Trump wanted, but it would take years, if not decades, to accomplish. Meanwhile, China was watching. Every American base closure creates a vacuum. Every troop withdrawal signals a change in American commitment. Chinese strategists have long studied American defense posture, looking for opportunities to expand Chinese influence. Trump's announcements gave them plenty to analyze. If America reduces its presence in the Pacific, Taiwan becomes more vulnerable. If Japan has to build its own military rather than relying on American protection, the balance of power in the region shifts. If South Korea faces a reduced American commitment, it might seek accommodation with China rather than confrontation. The Chinese government didn't need to take any immediate action. They could simply wait. Time was on their side. As American troops went home and American bases closed, Chinese power would grow by default. The international order that had kept China contained for decades was being dismantled by its creator. Russia drew similar conclusions. American troops in Europe had been the backbone of NATO defense since the Cold War. Reduce those troops by 30%, and the calculations change. NATO countries would have to spend more on their own defense. They would have to work more closely together without American leadership. They might disagree about how to handle Russian threats. Unity that American presence had guaranteed might fracture, but the most significant changes were happening inside America. The military that Trump was building looked nothing like the force that had dominated for the past 70 years. Traditional priorities were being abandoned. Aircraft carrier construction was slowed. The Navy's plan to build a fleet of 350 ships was reduced to 300. Fighter jet programs were scaled back. Army end strength, the total number of active duty soldiers, was scheduled to decline from approximately 450,000 to 400,000. The savings from these cuts flowed into new programs. The Space Force expansion was the most dramatic. Created in 2019 during Trump's first term as the sixth branch of the military, Space Force had remained relatively small and underfunded. Now it was becoming a priority. New satellites would provide global surveillance capability. Space-based sensors would detect missile launches anywhere in the world. And weapons, still classified, would give America the ability to operate in orbit in ways no other country could match. Cyber Command received similar attention. The ability to attack and defend computer networks had become central to modern warfare. Every adversary had invested in cyber capabilities. China had hacked American corporations and government agencies for decades. Russia had interfered in elections and attacked critical infrastructure. North Korea had stolen billions of dollars through cyber theft. Iran had targeted banks and energy companies. The old military wasn't built for this kind of conflict. The new military would be. And then there was the border. Trump had campaigned on border security in 2016 and again in 2024. Now he was integrating border defense into overall military strategy. The $18 billion allocated to border security in 2026 would fund a network of surveillance drones, ground sensors, automated detection systems, and artificial intelligence capable of tracking movement along thousands of miles of frontier. The military would provide technology and support to civilian agencies. The border would become a military priority in a way it had never been before. Critics called this a dangerous distraction. They said the real threats to American security came from China and Russia and terrorism, not from migrants crossing the southern border. They said diverting military resources to border security weakened American defenses against genuine adversaries. They said Trump was pursuing political goals rather than strategic ones. Supporters said the critics had missed the point. Trump was redefining what security meant. The old definition focused on threats overseas. The new definition focused on threats at home. Immigration, in Trump's view, was a national security issue. So were drugs crossing the border. So was the flow of undocumented people into American communities. A military that ignored these threats while protecting wealthy countries on the other side of the world had its priorities backward. By mid-2025, the outlines of Trump's vision had become clear. America would still have the most powerful military in the world, but it would be a different kind of power, less focused on presence, more focused on capability, less focused on alliances, more focused on sovereignty, less focused on maintaining international order, more focused on protecting national interests. The implications for allies were stark. For decades, countries like Germany, Japan, and South Korea had built their entire defense strategies around the assumption of American protection. They had invested in economics rather than military power because they didn't need to invest in military power. America would handle security. They could focus on prosperity. That assumption was no longer valid. Countries that wanted American protection would have to pay for it. Countries that couldn't pay or wouldn't pay would have to develop their own capabilities. Either way, the free ride was over. The implications for adversaries were more complex. On one hand, American withdrawal from overseas deployments created opportunities. Russia could pressure Eastern Europe without worrying about American intervention. China could assert itself in the Pacific without facing American resistance at every turn. On the other hand, an America focused on homeland defense might be more dangerous in certain scenarios. If adversaries threatened American territory directly, the response would be overwhelming, and the new investments in space and cyber capabilities gave America offensive options that didn't depend on overseas bases. The implications for the global economy were perhaps most significant of all. The American military doesn't just fight wars, it maintains the conditions that allow global trade to function. Shipping lanes stay open because American aircraft carriers patrol them. Countries resolve disputes through negotiation rather than force because American power provides security guarantees. The global financial system operates in dollars because American power backs that system. Remove American military presence and these arrangements become uncertain. Insurance costs for shipping increase. Trade routes become more dangerous. Regional conflicts that American presence suppressed might flare up. The global economy that depends on stability might face new turbulence. As 2025 progresses into 2026, the changes accelerate. The first American bases in Germany close, with soldiers returning to installations in the United States. Japan announces a dramatic increase in military spending, acknowledging that American protection can no longer be taken for granted. South Korea begins negotiations with its neighbors about regional security arrangements that don't depend on American leadership. Australia strengthens ties with Asian partners. The Philippines reconsiders its relationship with China. Taiwan watches nervously as American attention shifts elsewhere. The defense contractors adapt. Lockheed Martin pivots to space systems and hypersonic weapons. Raytheon emphasizes cyber capabilities. Smaller companies specializing in drones and autonomous systems see their stock prices soar. The industrial base that supports the American military begins a transformation that will take decades to complete, and at the center of it all stands Donald Trump, finally implementing the vision he articulated in a newspaper advertisement 38 years ago. American taxpayers will no longer fund the defense of wealthy nations. American soldiers will no longer stand guard on foreign soil without proper compensation. American power will no longer be deployed in the service of an international order that, in Trump's view, benefited everyone except America. Whether this makes the world safer or more dangerous is a question that won't be answered for years, perhaps decades. The system Trump is replacing took 70 years to build. Its benefits weren't always visible because they consisted of wars that didn't happen and conflicts that were deterred. Measuring what you prevented is impossible. You can only measure what occurred. What